everyone, Miss Nancy here with a really large selection of juvenile books, both nonfiction and fiction. So let's dive right in. I'm going to go through a few of them really quickly, but we're going to get through them all. I'm going to do a series of biographical picture books because that's become very popular these days, and I love them because kids can get the story about a famous person without having to go through a lot of dense texts. So the first one I have is called The Amazing Age of John Roy Lynch by Chris Barton. And I had no idea who John Roy Lynch was until I read this book. Chris Barton is the author of the well-loved Shark vs. Train picture book and many other wonderful picture books. And he's also a Texan. So this is a picture book biography of a man who went from a slave to a U.S. congressman in 10 years, which is just an amazing feat. I could not believe it. Lynch was the son of a white plantation overseer and a slave. And he gained his freedom through the Emancipation Proclamation, but he went on to see how all that freedom just kind of faded away during Reconstruction, because that was kind of a disaster. He vowed to continue the work of getting equal rights for African Americans, and this is what led him to be elected to Congress. It was kind of an uncomfortable read because you learn about how long it took for African Americans to achieve what they have achieved so far in America. Barton includes an historical note about the Reconstruction period, which most kids don't really study too much in depth in school. And it was a definite eye-opener. He also has a timeline and a map and all kinds of, and a good bibliography. So he did a lot of research about this individual. The illustrator is Don Tate. I loved his illustrations, and I felt it was a valuable read for kids learning about the Civil War, Reconstruction, and politics during the 20th century. And it may help them understand some of the current events that are going on in the news today, because Lynch's journey is an amazing one. So, The Amazing Age of John Roy Lynch by Chris Barton. It's also a Bluebonnet Award nominee for next school year's list. The next book I have got a very serious cover, but it's a very famous person. This is Frederick Douglass, and this book, many books have been written about him. This book is called Fredericks Journey, and it includes some of his iconic quotes. He's very famous, and it also details his life as a slave, where he went from different masters. He was beaten. He lived with his grandmother for a while, and then he was taken away from her, and he got passed around among owners' friends and relatives as a slave, very badly beaten. He saw a lot of cruelty during his time, and one of the slave owners' wives actually taught him to read for a brief period of time. He got to see the power of words during that time, but then the slave owner forced his wife to stop teaching him. So that's what led him to his life as a very famous advocate for African Americans and slaves. He finally escaped and became one of the most influential African American figures in the 19th century, and he has influenced countless others in their fight against oppression. The illustrations are done by London Ladd, and I'm only going to show you the cover at this point because this is such an iconic picture of Douglass. He was very serious about everything he did, and he's got a very stern, grim look. So try Frederick's Journey. It's by Doreen Rappaport. My next picture book biography is a little bit different. It's called The Elephant Man. It's by Mary Angela De Fiore. And most kids will not know who this gentleman is. The cover is kind of weird, a little bit scary, and might make some kids run, but I think he's an important figure to know. Years ago, I saw the Broadway play, The Elephant Man, and it was an extremely powerful drama. So when this book arrived, I checked it out. Most kids won't know about Joseph Merrick, who is the Elephant Man, but it's an important story to know. This is the 19th century, where everyone who is different is not wanted, not accepted. And Joseph definitely was not. He had a physical disease, and he was treated like a freak. This is also the time when circuses had freak sideshows, and that's where Joseph ends up at one point because it's the only way he can earn a living and support himself. His stepmother threw him out of the house. Kids can see some wonderful primary source material in this book because the artist has done some very interesting things by photoshopping photograph heads onto illustrations of people. And this is actually a doctor who saved Joseph Merrick from the life of the freak sideshow. They're very moving, and the kids will learn why he was called the Elephant Man. They're going to learn about how he was robbed of everything he earned from those sideshows when he was put on display, and he was totally abandoned. But there was one man, this doctor, who actually found him and brought him to live for the rest of his life in the famous Royal London Hospital. People around him could choose to accept him or not, and many did not. He could not change his situation. He was only 27 years old when he died, and he was a writer and a person just like us. And that's what I think is important for kids to learn today, is that, you know, we're all the same inside. So this is in our biography section, Elephant Man by Mariangela De Fiore. My next one is about a figure that I knew as a little girl. I didn't know her. I knew about her as a little girl. When I was growing up in the Chicago area, I read lots of biographies about all kinds of people because I wanted to read about how they overcame adversity or achieved a goal. And I remember reading a biography about Jane Addams because she was a very central figure in services for the poor in Chicago. So this book is called The House That Jane Built, a story about Jane Addams by Tanya Lee Stone. And it tells a story of Jane, who was a little girl from a very wealthy family. And she grew up to found Hull House, which was at the start one building to help the poor, and then became a collection of buildings where a whole organization fed people who were poor, they educated them, they helped them improve their conditions. And she was the first American woman to earn the Nobel Peace Prize, and also the FBI considered her one of the most dangerous women in America because she was opposed to war and she advocated for voting rights for women, among other things. So this book is a wonderful story about how she got Hull House started. All the illustrations by Catherine Brown are done kind of in pastels, and it really fits with the story of her kindness to people who did not have the wealth that she came from. So try The House That Jane Built, a story by Jane Addams, by Tanya Lee Stone. Okay, the last one I have is another Bluebonnet Award nominee, and there's some controversy about this book. It's called A Fine Dessert, 4 Centuries, 4 Families, One Delicious Treat by Emily Jenkins and Sophie Blackwell, which are, they are 2 very, very well known picture book authors. The story follows a dessert recipe used over the last 300 years. It's called Blackberry Fool. Now, it's not fool as in silly fool. It is a variation of a French meaning to mash. And so this goes from 1710 to 2010, and each family makes the dessert using the tools available to them at the time. So there's a wooden whisk, there's a metal whisk, there's a hand crank whisk, and an electric mixer. They get blackberries either by picking or buying them, depending on the century, and they get their cream by either milking the cow or having it delivered or buying it, depending on the century. And the families are varied. One is a slave mother and her daughter who serve their masters in the house. And the modern family is a boy and his father with many friends at the table. So whether they use a wooden spoon or a metal spoon or a synthetic spatula, the kid always gets to lick the bowl, which I loved. It's a wonderful book to show how food is the thing that binds human beings together. Jenkins details in the back how she researched everything about this dessert and the facts, the historical facts of each era. And there's the controversy about this book is that some people feel that the depiction of the slave mother and her daughter is more like happy slaves, which we know was not the case. But when I read this, I took it more as a sign of the bonding between the mother and her daughter, which often did not occur or was interrupted. So I didn't see it like other people did. I myself have never tried Blackberry Fool, but it sounds delicious enough to try, so I'm going to try it soon. So, A Fine Dessert, 4 Centuries, 4 Families, 1 Delicious Treat by Emily Jenkins and Sophie Blackwell. Okay, now we're going to get into juvenile fiction, but I have one more juvenile nonfiction book to show you, and I just loved this book. Let me grab it. This is called True Heroes, and it is a series of stories by famous writers like Shannon Hale and Brandon Mole and Ali Condi and Jennifer Nielsen, but it is all about real children who are battling cancer of some sort. So the photographer, Jonathan Diaz, and I'll start with Lily because Lily is awesome. What he's done is he has photographed them as some kind of hero. And you hear about Lily's story. She is battling Ewing sarcoma. And then the writer has crafted a tale where Lily is the main character and she is the hero in the story. So her story is called Lily, Warrior Princess. And it's not about the cancer, it's about her vanquishing some evil in the world, just like a superhero does. Another example is Sarah, who is battling leukemia, and her story is called Swimming in the Stars. So they've got her on a planet, and let's see if I can get one more to show you because it just was so awesome. Here's Braylon, and she's battling another form of leukemia, and her story is called Braylon and the Speeding Train. And so these children are just fabulous. The stories are really good. And I loved the photography by Jonathan Diaz. And so I urge you to try True Heroes, a treasury of modern-day fairy tales written by best-selling authors. Now we'll get into juvenile fiction. And I'm going to start with 2 old books that actually have become or are going to become movies. And so it's always nice, we always know that the book is better than the movie, and it's always nice to read the book first before you see the movie, and then you can compare what's going on. So the first one is The Great Gilly Hopkins, and this was published back in 1978. It's by Catherine Patterson, the author of Bridge to Terabithia. She has put a lot of work into the story, and the movie stars Glenn Close and Julia Stiles and Kathy Bates, and I haven't seen it yet, but I hope they've done this justice. So Gilly Hopkins, she was named for Galadriel, the elven royal in Lord of the Rings, and she's a 12-year-old foster child who has been bounced around from foster home to foster home to foster home for years. So she's tough, and she's very angry, and wherever she goes, she's determined to wreak havoc on that home. She longs for her mother. She doesn't know what happened to her, except that she knows she was abandoned. So she ends up at Mamie Trotter's house. And now Mamie is a very, very experienced foster mother, and she has finally met her match. In the beginning of the tale, we see Gilly being just ridiculous. She cusses all the time. She just is mean to every person, kid or adult, that she meets. And you just don't like her. You just really don't like her. But Mamie Trotter and her teacher, Miss Harris, figure out what the problem is. They recognize what's going on Gilly, and they work to draw her in. It's a sad, sad story. And it doesn't end in rainbows and unicorns, which I found very interesting. Her dreams are not the reality, but there is some hope and some promise and some practicality to the ending, and I won't tell you. I would offer this to 5th and 6th graders, and I'm so hoping that this movie will do this book justice. The Great Gilly Hopkins by Katherine Patterson. The next story is by Roald Dahl. And kids just love him. I did not grow up with Dahl, with his books. I've just come to him as an adult. So this is called The BFG. It is slated to come out as a movie sometime later this year and directed by Steven Spielberg. So I have high hopes that this will be a good movie. This is a fantasy. Little Sophie down here, she is snatched by a giant, and he takes her to this land of giants. And all the giants in this land, except the BFG, eat humans. They call them human beings, like green beans. And so that's where the wordplay begins. And this book is nothing if it's not just wonderful, fun wordplay. Some of the words you can't even figure out except by context, and some you can't even figure out at all. But that's what makes it so fun. This is the kind of book that will hook kids into reading and continuing to read. In the past, it's been criticized because of the content of giants eating human kids, but kids know this is fantasy, and they know it's all fun, so I see nothing wrong with it. Sophie and the BFG go and enlist the help of the Queen of England, that's part of the plot, to stop the other giants from eating all the children of England. I won't tell you how Dahl ends this book, but it is really, really fun, and you're just going to savor all the wonderful nonsense words that are in here. And Quentin Blake's original drawings are in here, and they're just nice little weird black and white ink and pen kind of things, and I just love them. They really make the story. So try The BFG by Roald Dahl. Now some newer ones. This is called The Toymakers Apprentice. I love this book. It's by Sherry Smith. She is the author of a couple of YA books, Fly Girl and Orleans. And in this one, she tackles a fairy tale reworking of The Nutcracker by E.T. Hoffman. And it is closer to Hoffman's story than what we know as The Nutcracker in the ballet. They're two very different stories. And she throws in a bit of Pinocchio with a curse that turns someone into a living wooden figure. And she uses all of the original story names. So Stefan Drosselmeyer has just completed his Toymaker apprenticeship with his father. But he doesn't want to just make plain dolls and wooden trains. He wants to make movable toys, animatronic toys. And he gets set to leave home to try to do that. But his cousin Christian comes in, and Christian is a master watchmaker, and he convinces him to become a watchmaker journeyman so he can blend the best of watchmaking and the best of toy making. But Christian is also on a mission. He has to save Moldavia's queen from a curse laid on her by the Mouse Queen, who is determined to defeat humans and rule the world. So this is a wonderfully fantastical book. It's got all kinds of plot twists and interesting characters. There's a 7-headed mouse in here, and squirrels that are scholars. I loved that it was closer to the original tale, and I think kids will like it. So try The Toymaker's Apprentice by Sherry Smith. My next book is a big, big, big fat book called Echo. It's a Bluebonnet Award nominee for next year, and it's called Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. She is very well known, an award-winning author, and she far exceeded my expectations with this book. It starts with a fairy tale connected to a story about a boy named Otto, and there are 3 other stories, and they're all connected to this common theme of beauty and comfort and prejudice and getting rid of those who are unwanted or perceived to be a threat, which is kind of an interesting story. And then there's a special harmonica that connects every character and every story to everything, so they all end up in the same story at the end. So the time span is from the 1930s to the early 1950s, and one occurs in Nazi Germany, where we meet Friedrich and his family trying to evade the Nazis, and then there's one in Pennsylvania a couple years later where Mike and his brother Frankie are trying to find a forever family because they've been abandoned during the Great Depression. Ivy appears in story 3 in California at the beginning of World War II, and then we go back to Otto's story, but now in New York City, but now it's 1951. I was just amazed at Ryan's ability to show how, even though things change, sometimes fear and paranoia and deep-seated prejudice just remain. So Jews, orphans, Japanese Americans, they're all people that weren't wanted, and people saw them as inferior. And Frankie and Mike have to deal with grief, someone's inability to grieve and move forward. And Friedrich, in the first story, has a birthmark that makes him labeled by the Nazis as someone who should not be able to have kids because he's defective. So the special harmonica moves from one story to the other, possessed by the character at a crucial time, and then passed on to the character of the next story, which I found very interesting. So the echo in this book is not only the bad treatment of certain people, but the really best part of humanity, the part where we care for one another, and we have both in us, and it's our choice which one to embrace. Her writing is easily accessible for kids. She knows how to move a story along, and she writes to let you know, to make you feel as if you are there. It is an amazing tale. So try Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. Okay, so my last book for you is an interesting book. It's another Bluebonnet nominee, and it's called Circus Miranda by Cassie Beasley. This is her first book, and I expect a lot of good things from her. So first, the word Mirandus in the title, it's Latin for something which is to be wondered or marveled at. And the circus in this book is not like anything like Ringling Brothers. In fact, it's magical. It doesn't exist in time or space. And it's only for kids who believe in magic, much like the bell that's in the story The Polar Express. To find it, you must believe. So we meet Micah Tuttle, who is the grandson to an old man named Ephraim Tuttle. And Micah has grown up hearing Grandpa's stories about Circus Miranda all his life in all its wonders. He loves those stories, and he likes to hear them over and over. Grandpa, Ephraim, is dying now, and Micah's rather nasty aunt has come to care for him, and she makes Micah's world miserable. But there's a wish. Back when Grandpa was a kid, the Lightbender, who is a man in the circus who does magical things, gave Ephraim one wish, and Ephraim decided he was going to hold on to it to use later in life. Well, now he wants to use his wish. So he sends a message to the Lightbender to come. He wants to use his wish, and Micah learns about that and begins to work to get the circus to come to town. He needs his grandfather to get well and continue to raise him. He has a new friend, Jenny, who doesn't believe in any of this at all, but she just goes along for the ride. And so that takes him on some very, very amazing adventures, including a lot of events where Micah learns about his family and where he really comes from. So more than anything, Circus Miranda is a story about faith in the impossible. And it's about loving and letting go. It's about sacrifice for those you love. And it's about wishes and miracles and hope and all those good things, and finding where you belong. The illustrations are exceptional. Let's see if I can find one here that's really good. And circus books are not necessarily, I'm meant to mark this.
Stop it.
There are wonderful illustrations in here, black and white, and they just help move the story along. I loved looking at them, and I think you will enjoy them too, because they weave a lot of magical elements into the story. So try Circus Miranda by Cassie Beasley. And that's all I have for you today. Enjoy the books and keep reading. Bye.